The bonding fire was already lit when Cassian Drager let go of her hand. Not dropped it. Let it go. There is a difference, and Elara Frostholt felt every inch of it, because a hand that is dropped is an accident, and a hand that is released is a decision. "Wait," she said quietly, because the whole hall was watching, and she still, even then, did not want to make a scene. "Cassian, what are you doing? Before we continue, please hit that like button, and tell me in the comments where you're watching from. I'd love to see how far this story reaches. Now let's continue." He did not look at her. He looked at his father, Alpha Roderick Drager, seated in the high chair at the edge of the firelight, and something passed between them. Some old understood signal, the kind fathers and sons share when a decision has already been made somewhere else, in some other room, long before the person standing at the altar was told about it. "The Night Vale Alliance," Cassian said, "to the fire, not to her, cannot wait another season. Their silver mines feed our winter stores. Their daughter. Say my name if you cannot say hers," Elara said. Her voice did not shake. She would think about that later, how strange it was that in the worst moment of her life, her voice had simply refused to shake, as if some older, calmer part of her had stepped forward to hold the front door while the rest of her fell apart in the back rooms of herself. Cassian finally looked at her. There was something almost like shame in his face, buried under 3 generations of a family that did not apologize, only explained. "Ren Nightvale," he said. "I am bonding with Ren Nightvale. Tonight, in your place." The hall did not gasp. 200 wolves in that firelit chamber went utterly silent instead. The specific silence of people who understand they are watching something that will be repeated in every pack hall on the continent by midwinter, and who do not yet know whether to be horrified or thrilled, because sometimes those two feelings wear the same face. Elara looked down at the braided cord around her wrist, the one Cassian had tied there 4 winters ago, at a much smaller, much kinder fire, when he had still looked at her like she was the answer to something instead of an inconvenience to be managed. She untied it herself. Her fingers did not fumble. She set it, gently, on the stone altar between them, beside the ceremonial bowl that had been waiting all evening to seal a bond that was, apparently, never going to be sealed. "You could have told me this morning," she said. "You could have told me last week. You chose to tell 200 people before you told me. I hope Ren Nightvale understands what kind of man that makes you." Mother Ysault, the pack elder presiding over the ceremony, opened her mouth as if to intervene, then closed it again. Some moments do not want an elder's blessing. They only want a witness. Elara turned and walked toward the great doors at the back of the hall. She did not run. She had promised herself, somewhere in the 4 seconds it had taken her to untie that cord, that she would not run, not tonight, not in front of these people, not for this man. Her mind, in that long walk down the length of the hall, did the strange thing minds do in the worst moments of a life. It wandered somewhere small and safe, while the rest of her kept moving forward. She thought of her mother, gone 11 winters now, who used to say that a wolf's dignity was the one thing no other wolf could take from her, only she could give it away. She thought of the 4 years she had spent learning border law at Cassian's elbow, so he would not embarrass himself in front of visiting alphas. 4 years he had apparently weighed, tonight, against a handful of silver mines, and found wanting. She thought, absurdly, of the dress she was wearing, chosen that morning because its color reminded her of her mother's garden in autumn, and how strange it was that a dress could survive a night like this completely unchanged, while everything underneath it did not. She counted her footsteps instead of her heartbeats, because her heartbeats were moving far too fast to be trusted. 1, 2, 3, 4. She had done this before, as a small girl, during the long, loud storms that used to roll over the eastern ridge, holding herself steady with something simple, while the larger things in the world thundered on without her permission. She was 3 steps from the door, when it burst open from the outside. Snow came in first, a hard gust of it, silver and biting, and behind the snow came 6 armed riders, in dark travel cloaks, and behind the riders, stamping ice from his boots on the threshold, like the storm itself had simply decided to walk indoors, stood a man the entire Northern Territories would have recognized on sight. 200 heads that had just been fixed on Elara Frostholt's back turned, as one, toward the door. Because the man standing in it, snow melting in his dark hair, a wolf's head crest pinned at his collar, was Corvin Ashgard. The alpha king of every pack on the continent had just walked into the middle of her ruined bonding ceremony, and he was looking directly at her. For 3 full seconds, nobody in the hall breathed correctly. Elara certainly did not. She stood frozen between the altar behind her and the storm in front of her, one hand still faintly warm from where the cord had sat against her wrist for 4 years, and she watched the king of all packs take in the scene before him. The abandoned altar, the untied cord on the stone, Cassian Drager's stricken face, the golden-haired woman near the front, who could only be Ren Nightvale, and read it, correctly, in about the time it took him to remove his gloves. "Forgive the interruption," Corvin Ashgard said, and his voice did not need to be raised to reach every corner of the hall. It simply filled the space the way deep water fills whatever holds it. "The pass south of here is closed by the storm. My convoy requires shelter for the night. I did not intend to arrive in the middle of a ceremony." "You have not," Alpha Roderick Drager said quickly, rising from his high chair, his tone gone smooth and careful, in the particular way of a man recalculating an entire evening in real time. "The ceremony has concluded, Your Majesty. You are, of course, welcome under Drager roof." Corvin's gold-flecked eyes moved once around the hall, taking in the altar, the abandoned cord, the young woman standing closest to the door with her spine very straight and her chin very level, the way a person stands when they have decided that falling apart is a thing they will schedule for later, in private. "It has concluded," he repeated, mildly, as though testing the word. "I see." He did not ask what had happened. He did not need to. Every pack hall in the north had learned, over the years, that Corvin Ashgard rarely asked questions he already knew the answers to. Elara realized, with a small, strange jolt, that she was still standing directly in his path, and that he had not moved around her the way people usually moved around inconvenient obstacles in a room. He had simply stopped, close enough that the cold coming off his cloak reached her, and looked at her the way you look at something you are trying to place. "You were leaving," he said, quietly enough that it did not carry past the two of them. "I was," she said, "alone, into that." He tipped his head very slightly toward the doors, where the storm was still throwing itself against the frame. "I have walked home in worse. I do not doubt it," he said, and something in his tone was not quite a smile, but stood very near to where a smile would have been. "I would still rather you did not walk home in this." Behind them, Ren Nightvale had recovered her composure enough to step forward and offer the king a graceful, practiced bow, already angling herself into the evening's new center of gravity with the ease of a woman who had clearly rehearsed several versions of tonight. Cassian trailed a half-step behind her, saying something about honored guests and warmed wine, his voice pitched too high to be entirely steady. Corvin did not look at either of them. He looked, for one more beat, at Elara. "Your name," he said. "Elara Frostholt." Frostholt. He turned the name over, as if checking it against something in memory. "Bran Frostholt's daughter. You know my father." "I know of him. A modest holding on the eastern ridge. Honest man, good hunter." A pause. "Better reputation than most alphas twice his territory's size." It should not have mattered to her what a king thought of her father's reputation. It mattered anyway. She felt it land somewhere under her ribs, a small warm stone in a night that had otherwise gone entirely cold. "My convoy will take the guest wing your alpha offers us," Corvin said, straightening, his voice returning to the level, carrying register he used for rooms. "But the roads to the eastern ridge will not be safe tonight. For anyone, I would ask that Bran Frostholt's daughter accept escort home in the morning, when the storm has passed, rather than the offer of a Drager roof tonight." It was, on its surface, a small courtesy. A king making sure a humiliated young woman did not have to sleep under the same roof as the man who had just discarded her in front of 200 witnesses. Ilara understood, even then, standing in the doorway with snow still swirling around both their boots, that it was not a small courtesy at all. It was the first move in something much larger, though she did not yet know its shape. "Thank you, Your Majesty," she said. "Corvin," he said, so quietly it barely reached her, "when I am not performing for a room." Then he turned, and the moment closed, and he moved into the hall to accept Alpha Draeger's flustered hospitality, and Ilara Frostholt stood alone in the doorway for one more second, snow at her back, the ruins of her bonding ceremony behind her, and a king's low voice still settling somewhere in her chest, like a stone dropped into still water. She did not yet know that the ripples from that stone would reach every packed territory on the continent before the year was out. Ilara was still 3 sentences into her explanation to her father the next morning when the guard at the door announced that the king wished to speak with them both, privately, before his convoy departed. Bran Frostholt set down his tea with the careful stillness of a man who has spent his whole life being modest and is not entirely sure what to do when the largest possible attention in the wolf world turns, without warning, toward his small Eastern Ridge house. "Papa," Ilara said, "breathe." "I am breathing," he said, in a voice that suggested he was not. Corvin came in without ceremony, waving off the offer of a formal seat, standing instead near the modest hearth with the ease of a man who did not require grandeur to feel comfortable in a room. His aunt, Lady Isha Ashgard, sharp-eyed and silver-haired, came in behind him and took the only good chair without asking, the way a woman does when she has decided long ago that pleasantries cost more time than they are worth. "I will not waste your morning," Corvin said. "There have been movements in the Northern Territories in the last 2 months. Displaced Alpha Lords, men who lost land and standing when the Crown reorganized the border territories 5 years ago. They have begun calling themselves the Hollow Fang. Small raids, threats sent to minor holdings. Nothing the Crown has been able to trace to a single hand yet." "Forgive me, Your Majesty," Bran said carefully, "but what has this to do with my daughter?" "Possibly nothing," Corvin said. "Possibly everything. I would rather find out under my protection than under theirs." Ilara felt the room tilt slightly. "You think they would come for me?" "I am no one. I was, until last night, a beta's promised mate from a minor holding. I am not even that now." "You are Marin Frostholt's daughter," Lady Isha said, and something in the way she said it made both Ilara and her father go very still. "You knew my mother." "I knew of her line," Isha said, and did not elaborate, and something passed over her face too quickly to name before she smoothed it away. "That is a conversation for another day. Today, I am here because my nephew has an offer, and because someone with sense needs to be in the room while he makes it, since he has the emotional delivery of a closed door." Corvin did not dispute this. "Here is the offer," he said, and Ilara noticed, with some private surprise, that he addressed it to her directly, not to her father. "You come to the royal court, not as a mate, not as a decoration, as a companion and political tutor to my aunt, whose household requires someone with an active mind, and as a voice on the Northern Trade Council, where a woman who has spent 3 years learning treaty law for a man who never once thanked her for it would be considerably more useful than she has been given credit for." "You looked into that," Ilara said slowly. "I make it my business to know what I am offering before I offer it. And in exchange?" "In exchange, your father's holding comes under Crown protection, effective today, which, Hollow Fang or no Hollow Fang, will discourage every ambitious neighbor who has been eyeing his ridge for the last decade. And you accept that until we understand what these threats actually want, you are safer inside my walls than outside them." Ilara looked at her father. She saw, in his face, the particular exhausted hope of a man who had spent years watching his daughter give herself away to people who did not deserve the gift, and who did not quite dare believe someone was finally offering her a door that opened outward instead of a room to be kept in. She thought, standing there in her father's small kitchen, with a king's offer hanging in the air, like smoke that had not decided which way to drift. Of every version of this moment she might have imagined as a girl, none of them had looked like this. None of them had felt this careful, this measured, two strangers weighing each other across a modest table instead of falling into each other's arms the way the old songs promised. And yet there was something in the carefulness itself that steadied her, because a man who measured his offers this precisely was a man unlikely to break them carelessly later. "I have a condition," she said, turning back to Corvin. The king's expression did not change, but Lady Isha, in her chair, made a small approving sound, like a woman recognizing a particular kind of good sense when she saw it. "I am listening," Corvin said. "I will not be a quiet guest in your aunt's household. If I sit on a trade council, I sit on it with a real voice, not a chair kept warm for appearances. And I want it understood, by everyone in that court, exactly why I am there, not as a rumor, not as gossip passed hand to hand. I will not spend a second life being talked about instead of being heard." For a moment, nobody spoke. The fire popped in the modest little hearth. Outside, the last of the storm was breaking apart into pale winter sun. "Agreed," Corvin said. He extended his hand. Elara looked at it for a long moment. A king's hand, scarred faintly along two knuckles from some old dispute, offered to her the same way you offer a tool to someone you trust to use it, and then she placed her own hand in his. It was, she would think much later, the first true choice she had made for herself in 3 years. Nobody had taken anything from her this time. She had simply decided to walk through the door being held open. "Then we have an understanding, Your Majesty," she said. "Corvin," he said again, quietly, and this time there was the faintest thread of warmth in it that had not been there the night before. Behind them, Lady Isha rose from her chair with the brisk satisfaction of a woman whose morning had gone exactly as she'd hoped. "Good," she said. "Now let us pack, child, before my nephew changes his mind about how much talking he's just agreed to sit through." Bran Frostholt caught his daughter's sleeve gently before she followed the king's aunt from the room. "You do not have to do this for me," he said quietly. "The protection, the coin. I would rather live modestly and safely than have you trade one cage for a grander one." "It is not a cage, Papa." Elara pressed her hand over his. "For the first time since Mother died, someone has asked me what I want, instead of telling me what I am for. I intend to find out what that feels like, for as long as it lasts." She kissed his weathered cheek. "Watch the ridge. Keep the fire lit. I will send word every week. I promise you that much." He nodded, though his eyes were bright, and watched his daughter walk out into a future far larger than the one he had spent 20 years quietly hoping for her, and found, to his own surprise, that the fear in his chest had room enough left over for something that felt very much like hope. Elara woke gasping, 3 weeks into her new life at the royal keep, from a dream she could not fully remember, except for one detail, her mother's voice, calling her name from somewhere behind a closed door that would not open no matter how hard she pulled at it. She sat up in the unfamiliar bed, heart still going too fast, and pressed her palm flat against her own collarbone until the feeling passed. Her mother had died when Elara was 11. A house fire, they had always told her, on a night when Bran had been away at a border meeting and Elara had been sent to stay with an aunt 3 valleys over. A small mercy, everyone said at the time, that she had not been home. Elara had never questioned it as a child. She questioned it more, now, for reasons she could not entirely explain, except that Lady Isha had a habit of going very quiet whenever Marin Frostholt's name came up, and quiet, in a woman like Isha, was never simply quiet. She tried, once, to ask Isha directly about the fire that had taken her mother, over breakfast on her second week at the keep, and watched the older woman's face close like a shutter against a storm. "Your mother was a private woman," Isha said, stirring her tea with more attention than the tea required. "She kept old family matters to herself, even from those closest to her. I would not presume to know more than your father does." "That is not an answer." "No," Isha agreed, and did not offer another one, and Ilara understood, even then, that she was being managed rather than answered, gently and skillfully, by a woman who had clearly done a great deal of both in her long life at court. She found out part of the reason 3 mornings later, entirely by accident, while dressing for a council rehearsal. "Hold still," Isha said, adjusting the collar of Ilara's new formal coat, and then went very still herself, her fingers frozen just above the curve of Ilara's collarbone, where a faint crescent-shaped birthmark sat pale against her skin, half hidden beneath the fabric. "What is it?" Ilara asked. "Nothing," Isha said, too quickly, and pulled the collar higher to cover the mark entirely. "A trick of the light. Turn. Let me see the sleeve length." Ilara turned. She did not press the matter, not yet, though she filed the moment away carefully, the way she had learned to file away every small crack in a smooth surface, because cracks, in her experience, were where the truth eventually came through. The rehearsals themselves, at least, gave her something solid to hold on to. She sat at the long table in the Northern Trade Council chamber 3 afternoons a week, listening to lords twice her age argue over border tariffs and grain routes, and found, to her quiet astonishment, that she was good at this. Genuinely good. 3 years of memorizing treaties for a man who had never once asked her opinion had built, without her fully realizing it, a mind that could hold an entire territorial dispute in careful order, and find, within it, the one thread worth pulling. Corvin attended these rehearsals more often than his schedule strictly required. What she noticed too, the particular way he watched her when she spoke. Not the polite half-attention men usually gave a woman's opinion before returning to the real conversation, but something closer to actual listening, weighing, reconsidering. It unsettled her more than dismissal ever had, because dismissal she knew how to survive. This she did not yet know what to do with. "You disagree with Lord Halvard's assessment of the river crossing," Corvin said to her, one afternoon, after the others had filed out. "I do." "Say why." "He is measuring the crossing by what it costs to maintain. He should be measuring it by what it costs the crown if it fails during a spring flood and 3 territories lose their grain route in the same season. He is counting coins. He should be counting consequences." Corvin studied her for a long moment. "You have been in this court 3 weeks. Is that an objection?" "It is an observation," he said, and there it was again, that almost smile, worn and rare, and she was beginning to suspect, entirely genuine when it appeared. "I have lords who have sat at that table for 20 years and have never once made that distinction." "Then perhaps," she said, "your table has had the wrong voices at it for 20 years. He laughed. It was a short sound, low and a little surprised, as if it had escaped him before he'd decided whether to allow it, and Ilara felt something warm and unfamiliar move through her chest at having been the one to cause it. A letter arrived for her that same evening, carried up by Seela Ravenscroft, the sharp, dark-braided young attendant Lady Isha had assigned to her in the first week, and who had proven, in the weeks since, entirely unshakable, right up until tonight, when she handed over the sealed letter, with an expression Ilara had not seen on her before. The seal was Nightvale gold. The handwriting, elegant and deliberately unhurried, belonged to Wren. "I hear the Northern Court finds you quite useful, Ilara. How fortunate, to discover a purpose after losing a future. I do hope you will attend the spring gathering. Cassian and I would so love for you to see what you helped make possible." Ilara read it twice. She did not feel the old wound she expected to feel. She felt, instead, a small, cold clarity, the kind that comes right before a storm decides which direction it intends to travel. "She wants me at that gathering," Ilara said quietly. "Are you going?" Seela asked. Ilara folded the letter and set it down beside the crescent-marked collar Isha had adjusted 3 days before. 2 small mysteries sitting side by side on the same table, both waiting, she suspected, to be opened by the same hand. "Yes," she said, "I believe I am." The goblet hit the floor of the grand hall before the herald had even finished announcing her name, and the sound of it shattering was the only thing anyone heard for a full second afterward. Elara Frostholt of House Frostholt, Ward of the Crown, voice of the Northern Trade Council, the herald called, and 400 wolves in the tiered gallery turned to watch her descend the ceremonial staircase at Corvin Ashgard's side, dressed not in a mate's ceremonial color, but in a deep council blue that belonged, unmistakably, to a woman who held her own seat at her own table. No bonding stone, no formal pendant. The room had clearly expected one, had been murmuring about one for a full week, since word spread that the king himself had brought the discarded Frostholt girl into his court, and the absence of it, the plain, deliberate fact that Corvin Ashgard had chosen to elevate her without claiming her, unsettled the gathered lords more than any bonding announcement could have. He respects her enough not to own her, Elara heard someone whisper from the lower tier, and did not know, herself, whether the thought made her want to laugh or cry. Cassian Drager stood near the front with Ren Nightvale on his arm, and Elara watched his face do something complicated when she reached the bottom of the stairs. Not quite regret, not quite anger, something caught uncomfortably between the two. A man watching a decision he'd made cheaply turn out to have cost considerably more than he'd budgeted for. "Elara," Cassian said, stepping forward before she could pass. "You look, Cassian." Her voice was even, pleasant, even, the particular pleasant that costs a great deal to produce and gives away nothing for free. "Ren, I hope the season has been kind." "Ren, you are on the Trade Council," Cassian said, and there was something almost accusing in it, as though her success were a personal insult he had not been warned about. "I am." "That is not a role given lightly." "No," Elara agreed, "it is not." Ren's composed smile had developed the faintest crack at one corner, the look of a woman recalculating a story she had told herself was finished. "How fortunate," she said, "that rejection agreed with you so well." "It was not the rejection that agreed with me," Elara said. "It was what came after it. There is a lesson in that, if either of you cared to learn it, but I do not believe you do." She did not wait for a reply. She inclined her head, precisely the correct depth for two lords of equal minor standing, and moved past them into the hall, where Corvin was waiting with an expression he was not bothering, this time, to fully contain. "That," he said quietly, once they were out of earshot, "was better than anything I could have arranged for you. I did not do it for effect." "I know," he said. "That is why it worked." It was across the hall, near the tall windows overlooking the winter gardens, that Elara first noticed Lord Alaric Thorn watching her. He was an older man, silver at the temples, dressed with the careful austerity of someone who wanted his restraint noticed. He had lost a significant portion of his eastern holdings 5 years earlier, during Corvin's border reorganizations, and had spent every gathering since attending with the stiff, wounded correctness of a man nursing a grievance he had decided never to voice aloud, only to nurse. He was not looking at her the way the rest of the hall looked at her, with curiosity, or judgment, or the particular hunger of gossip finding new fuel. He was looking at her the way you look at a locked door, when you already suspect what key fits it. "Who is that?" Elara asked Corvin quietly, by the garden windows. "Lord Alaric Thorn, displaced when I reorganized the eastern border. He believes, not entirely without cause, that the crown owes him more than it has given." Elara studied the older man a moment longer, and then her eyes caught something else. A heavy silver ring on his right hand, worn on the smallest finger, engraved with a small crescent shape that made her breath catch somewhere behind her ribs. The same shape, near enough, as the mark on her own collarbone that Lady Isha had covered so quickly, 3 days before, and refused to explain. She said nothing, not yet. She filed it away, carefully, in the same quiet place where she kept every other crack in every other smooth surface, and turned her attention back to the hall, where the evening's music had begun, and where, for the first time in a very long time, a great many people were watching her not with pity, but with something closer to caution. She found, to her own surprise, that she preferred it. Later that night, after the music had ended and most of the hall had drifted toward the wine tables and the low, easy gossip that follows any gathering once the formal business of staring at one another is done. Ilara stepped out onto a side balcony for air and found Corvin already there, alone, looking out over the dark winter gardens. "You handled Thorn's watching very well," he said, without turning. "Most people either pretend not to notice or stare back too obviously. You did neither." "I have had practice noticing things people would rather I did not," she said, coming to stand beside him at the rail. 3 years of watching Cassian's face, for which mood he had brought home, taught me more about reading a room than any council rehearsal has. That should not have been a skill you needed to build. "No," she agreed. "But I have it now, and I intend to spend it usefully, rather than mourn how I came by it." She glanced at him sideways. "You are doing it too, you know. Watching. You have been doing it since the gathering began." He did not deny it. "I find," he said carefully, "that I have grown considerably less interested in this hall full of lords, and considerably more interested in whether the woman beside me is enjoying herself despite them." "I am," she said, surprising herself with how true it felt to say it. "More than I expected to." The silence that followed was not uncomfortable. It was the particular quiet of two people, standing close enough to feel each other's warmth against the cold night air, neither quite ready to name what was building between them, both aware, without needing to say so, that naming it would change everything that came after. The bundle was already sitting on the table when Ilara walked into her sitting room at dawn, and Sailor's face, standing guard beside it, told her before a single word was spoken that whatever was inside had not been sent as a gift. "Left at the north gate before sunrise," Sailor said. "No rider seen, just left in the snow with your name burned into the wrapping. I brought it straight to you before the guard captain heard of it." The wrapping was plain oiled cloth, and burned crudely into it, in old runic lettering that had gone out of common use 2 generations ago, was a single word: Frostblood. Inside was a torn page, brittle with age, clearly pulled from some old genealogical record. A family tree, faded ink, names Ilara did not recognize branching upward from a single circled entry near the bottom. Maren, of the Moonwood line. Beneath the circled name, in fresh ink, someone had written 6 words that made the room feel suddenly, dangerously small. "The daughter carries what the mother hid." "Your Grace," Seela said carefully, using the title the court had begun, unofficially, to attach to her. "Should we take this to the king?" Ilara looked at her mother's name circled in old ink, at the fresh threat written beneath it, and thought of Lady Isha's fingers freezing above her collarbone 3 days into her arrival at court. Thought of Lord Thorn's crescent ring, and the way he had watched her across the winter garden windows, like a man confirming an old suspicion. "Not yet," she said. "Ilara. He is 3 days into border negotiations with the coastal pacts. If I bring him a mystery with no answer attached to it, he will abandon that table and come running, and I will have cost the crown a treaty over a piece of old paper I do not yet understand myself." She folded the page carefully. "I want to understand it first, then I will tell him everything." She went to the Royal Archive that night, alone, past the hour when the household usually slept, and found the old archivist, a stooped, patient man named Corbin Wells, still awake among his shelves, as archivists in stories like this one so often are. "Moonwood," he said, when she gave him the name, and went very still in a way that reminded her uncomfortably of Isha. "That is old lore, child, older than the current crown line. Where did you hear it? I would rather show you than say it." She showed him the page. He read it twice, his expression growing graver with each pass, and then he led her deeper into the archive, to a locked case near the back, and drew out a single ancient volume bound in cracked leather. "Old Wolf Lore," he said, laying it open on the table between them. Before the pacts unified under a single crown, held that no alpha could claim the true title of king over all territories without a mate carrying Moonwood blood at his side. It was meant to balance power, to ensure no single bloodline could hold the crown by strength alone. The law fell out of practice generations ago, when most believed the moonward line had died out entirely. He looked up at her. If it has not died out, if it survives, even diluted, in a single living descendant, then any Alpha Lord with a claim to royal blood could use that person to challenge the current crown, Elara finished quietly, either by forcing a bond or by removing them so no rival can. Yes, Corbin said. Either possibility would explain a great deal of unrest in the north these past months. Elara sat very still, the old page trembling faintly in her hand, and understood, in a single cold rush, exactly why Corvin Ashgard had appeared at her ruined bonding ceremony, out of a snowstorm, on the one night her life had fallen apart. She did not hear him enter the archive behind her. She only felt the change in the room, the particular way air shifts when someone large and quiet has stopped a few feet away, and turned to find Corvin standing in the doorway, snow still on his boots from some late errand, his gold-flecked eyes moving from her face to the open volume on the table and back again. "Elara," he said slowly, "what are you reading?" She held up the torn page with her mother's circled name and watched something close and careful settle over his features. Not surprise. Recognition. "You already know," she said. It was not a question. "You have known since before you walked through those doors that night." The silence that followed lasted long enough for the fire in the archive hearth to pop twice, and in it, Elara felt the ground she had only just begun to trust beneath her feet, quietly, unmistakably, begin to shift. "How long," Elara said, "have you known?" Corvin closed the door behind him before he answered, and the click of the latch sounded, in the archive's stillness, unbearably loud. "I heard rumors of a surviving moonward line 8 months ago," he said. "Whispers out of the Eastern Territories. Nothing confirmed. I sent quiet inquiries to every minor holding, with a Frostholt or a moonward name buried anywhere in its genealogy." He paused. "Your mother's name came back from a border archive 3 weeks before I rode north." 3 weeks. Her voice was very steady, the way it had been steady the night at the altar, that older, calmer part of her stepping forward to hold the door while the rest of her reeled. "You knew who I was before you ever saw me. You knew what I might be worth to your crown before you ever spoke a word to me." "Yes." "Then tell me honestly, Corvin, did you offer me a place in your court because of what you saw in that hall, or because of what was written in a border archive 3 weeks earlier?" He was quiet for a long moment, and she understood, watching him, that he was not searching for a comfortable answer. He was searching for the true one, because he had never, in the time she had known him, offered her anything less. "I rode north to find a name in an old record," he said finally. "I did not expect to find a woman standing at a ruined altar with her spine straight and her voice steady, refusing to fall apart in front of 200 people who wanted to watch her do exactly that. I did not plan for that. I have spent a great deal of effort since pretending the two things happened separately in my mind. They did not. I know that now. I am not certain it makes it easier to hear." "It does not," Elara said, "because I do not know, standing here, whether you love the woman or the bloodline, and I do not think you know either." "Elara, I need time," she said, before he could finish. "Not distance from you, time. I have spent 3 years being a tool for one man's ambition without knowing it, and I do not intend to walk blind into being a tool for another's, however much better it is dressed." He did not argue. That, more than anything else he might have said, told her something true about him, that he understood, better than most men of his rank ever bothered to, when a thing needed to be given room rather than fought for. "Take whatever time you need," he said quietly. "I will not chase you for an answer you are not ready to give." She left the archive that night with more questions than she had entered with, and slept badly, and woke 3 mornings later to news that unsettled her more than the torn page ever had. Cassian Drager had requested a private audience, alone, claiming urgent information regarding threats to the crown. She met him in a small receiving room, cellar stationed just outside the door, and found him thinner than she remembered, hollow around the eyes in the particular way of a man who has not slept properly in some weeks. "I have been passing information," he said, without preamble, the words coming out fast, as though he had rehearsed them, and feared losing his nerve if he slowed down. "Small things. Travel routes. Council schedules. Alaric Thorne approached me 2 months ago, before the gathering, offering to help restore Draeger influence in the East if I gave him certain details about the Crown's movements." "Cassian." Alara's voice had gone very cold. "What have you done?" I did not know what he intended with it. I swear that to you, I thought it was politics, leverage, nothing more. He stopped himself, pressed a hand over his eyes. He asked, 3 days ago, for your travel schedule, when you next intended to leave the royal keep. I refused him. That is why I am here. I refused him, and he did not take it well, and I am afraid, Ilara, of what that means for what he intends to do without my help. Ilara sat very still, feeling the last piece of a picture she had been slowly assembling for weeks, click, cold and certain, into place. Thorne had not simply been watching her out of old grievance. He had been building a plan around her for months, using Cassian's guilt and ambition as a quiet, convenient thread. "You should have come to me the moment he first approached you," she said. "I know. You may have just saved my life by coming now, instead of never." Cassian looked at her for a long moment, something raw and unguarded moving across his face, the closest thing to honesty she had seen from him since the night he let go of her hand at the altar. "I know I do not deserve to hear this from you," he said quietly, "but I am sorry, Ilara, not only for the ceremony, for every quiet way I made you feel smaller than you were. For 3 years, before that, you deserved better than what I gave you. I see that now, watching what you became somewhere I did not have to give you permission to become it." Ilara did not forgive him, not fully, not in that room, but she felt something in her chest ease slightly all the same. Not for his sake, she realized, but for her own. Anger, she was learning, was heavy to carry, and she did not much feel like carrying his any longer. "Go to Garrick Stonewell," she said. "Tell him everything you told me, every detail. If Thorne intends to move against the Crown, we will need every hour of warning you can give us." She left that room already composing, in her mind, the letter she would need to send to Corvin that evening. Not a letter of distance this time, but one of warning. Because whatever remained unresolved between the two of them, she understood now, with total clarity, that neither of them had the luxury of solving it slowly. Not anymore. The first arrow struck the lead horse, before Ilara even registered the sound of the bowstring, and then the world became noise. She had left for the eastern ridge at dawn, 2 days after Cassian's confession, a small escort of 4 guards and Sella at her side, determined to see her father and warn him herself before Thorne's next move revealed its shape. She had not expected the road through Wolf's Hollow to be where that move arrived. "Down!" Sella shouted, already pulling her from the saddle as the second and third arrows found their marks among the escort, and Ilara hit the frozen ground hard enough to lose her breath, rolling instinctively toward the cover of the tree line, the way her father had taught her to move through brush, a decade before she had ever imagined needing the skill for anything more than a hunt. Riders broke from the trees on both sides of the road, 6 of them, wearing no colors, which told her everything about who had sent them. Sela went down hard, an arrow catching her shoulder, and Ilara felt something in her chest turn to pure, focused ice. She had spent 3 years learning to be patient. She had spent 3 months learning to be heard. She had spent her whole life, without fully realizing it, learning to be still in the face of things that hurt her. She was done being still. She reached the fallen escort captain's short blade before the nearest rider reached her, and when he swung down from his horse, expecting an easy target, he found instead a woman who moved the way her father had taught her to move through the eastern ridge forests as a girl, low, fast, unafraid of getting close. She was not as strong as him. She did not need to be. She only needed to be quicker and angrier, and entirely unwilling to let him reach Sella's unguarded side. She did not know how long the fight lasted. Time, in moments like that, does not move the way it usually does. She knew only that she was still standing, blade in hand, breath tearing at her chest, when she heard hoofbeats thundering down the ridge road from the direction of the royal keep, and looked up to see Corvin Ashgard leading a dozen riders at a speed that suggested he had not slept, or eaten, or paused for anything at all, since the moment word of the ambush had reached him. He was off his horse before it had fully stopped moving. Ilara, her name, torn out of him rough and raw, nothing careful in it at all. His hands found her face, checking for wounds with a franticness she had never seen him allow himself before. "Are you hurt?" "No," she said. "Sela, she's hurt. She needs." Garrick has her. He did not let go of her face. His eyes, gold-flecked and usually so composed, were wide with something that looked, unmistakably, like fear. "When the message reached me, when I understood you were on this road," he stopped, started again. "I have faced down armed men without flinching more times than I can count, Ilara. I did not know fear could feel like that. Like the entire world narrowing down to a single question with no acceptable answer except one." Behind them, one of Thorn's remaining riders, cornered and desperate, spat something bitter into the cold air before Garrick's men dragged him off toward the keep. "You think this ends today? Lord Thorn carries the old blood too. He will have his crown, girl, with or without your help." Corvin's jaw went tight. "Thorn, of course it was Thorn. He wants me for the bloodline," Ilara said quietly, the pieces settling into place even through her still racing heart. "Either to force a claim through me, or to remove me so no one else can use me against him. Either way, I was never simply in his way, Corvin. I was the entire game." "Not anymore," Corvin said, and there was something new in his voice, something that had shed every last careful, measured layer he usually wore like armor. "I do not care what old law says a crown requires. I care that you are standing here, breathing, in front of me, and I very nearly did not get to see that again." He pulled her against him, one arm banding hard around her back, his other hand cradling the back of her head the way you hold something you are terrified of losing, and Ilara felt him shaking, actually shaking, this enormous, composed, careful man who had ridden into her ruined bonding ceremony out of a snowstorm without so much as raising his voice. "I am here," she said against his chest. "I am here, Corvin. I am not going anywhere." He pulled back just enough to look at her, both hands framing her face, and for the first time since the archive, since the careful distance she had asked for and he had honored without complaint, she saw the full unguarded truth of what he felt for her, sitting plainly in his eyes, with nothing left to protect it. "Thorn is not finished," he said quietly. "He will move again, and soon, now that this has failed. Then we will be ready for him," Ilara said. "Together, no more secrets between us, Corvin. Not about the old law, not about anything." "No more secrets," he agreed, and kissed her, there on the frozen ridge road, snow still settling around the wreckage of the ambush, with a fierceness that held nothing back, because a man who has just watched the world nearly take everything from him no longer sees the sense in careful restraint. They rode back to the keep in near silence, Sela bandaged and resting against Garrick's shoulder in the lead wagon, the captured rider bound and sullen behind them. Ilara sat close against Corvin's side for the whole of the journey, watching the pines slide past in the fading light, and found her mind returning, again and again, to the moment Thorn's rider had spoken Thorn's name aloud on the road, confirming what she had already begun to suspect from a silver ring worn at a winter gathering. "He has been circling me since the day I arrived at your court," she said quietly. "I should have told you the moment I noticed the ring." "You were not yet certain," Corvin said. "A suspicion is not evidence, and I would rather you learn to trust your instincts fully before you learn to act on half of them." That said, he glanced down at her, something wry beneath the exhaustion in his face. "From this day forward, any suspicion involving a man with a private army finds its way to me before it finds its way into an archive at midnight." "I will consider it," Ilara said, and felt, despite everything the day had cost them, the corner of her mouth lift for the first time since the arrows had started falling. The message reached the royal keep at midnight, 3 weeks later, carried by a rider half frozen from the northern roads. Lord Alaric Thorne had gathered what remained of the Hollow Fang at the old stone bridge crossing Wolf's Pass, and he had Cassian Drager. He took him from his own hall, the rider gasped, still catching his breath. 2 nights ago, left a message behind for the crown. He says he will trade the Drager heir's life for the Frosthold woman's presence at the bridge by dawn, alone. He will have neither, Corvin said, already moving toward the war room, his voice flat and hard, in a way Elara had not heard from him before. Garrick, ready the riders. I am going, Elara said. You are not. Corvin. She caught his arm, forcing him to stop, to look at her properly, instead of already 3 steps ahead in some strategy she was not yet part of. He wants me because he believes I am the key to his claim. If I do not go, he has no reason to negotiate at all, and Cassian dies for nothing, and Thorne simply regroups and comes for me again on ground of his own choosing next time. If I go, on our terms, with our people positioned properly, we end this tonight, not in 3 more weeks of waiting for the next ambush. I cannot lose you at that bridge. You will not, she said, because I am not going as a hostage walking to her own trade. I am going as your council's voice, with a plan, and with you and every rider you can spare hidden in those trees before I ever set foot on that stone. She held his gaze steadily. You taught me, without meaning to, that I am more useful with a seat at the table than locked safely away from it. Do not take that back from me now, when it matters most. He was quiet for a long moment, and then, slowly, he nodded, because he understood, better than almost any man alive, what it cost a person to be protected out of the very thing that made them worth protecting. They spent what remained of the night planning by lantern light, Garrick Stonewell tracing the pass on an old map, while Elara laid out every detail she remembered from the Trade Council's surveys of that region, the narrow places where riders could be hidden, the single approach that gave Thorne's men no room to scatter once the Crown's forces closed in. Corvin watched her work with the particular quiet pride of a man who had once offered her a seat at his table as a calculated risk, and now could not imagine that table without her at it. You are frightened, he said, when the others had stepped out to ready the horses and they were alone with the map between them. Yes, she admitted. I have been frightened since the moment that Ryder spoke Thorne's name on the Ridge Road. I do not intend to let it stop me. Those are different things. They are, he agreed, and reached across the map to take her hand, steady and warm, despite the cold hour and the danger waiting for them both at dawn. I learned that lesson from watching you walk out of a ruined ceremony with your spine straight. I have not forgotten it since. They reached Wolf's Pass before first light. Riders concealed among the pines on both ridges, above the old stone bridge. Elara, walking out alone, onto the crossing exactly as the eastern sky began to pale. Cassian knelt at the bridge's center, bound and bruised but alive, 2 of Thorne's remaining men flanking him, and Lord Alaric Thorne himself stood a few paces back, the crescent ring catching the first grey light. You came, Thorne said, sounding almost surprised, as if some part of him had expected the crown to abandon its own bargaining chip. I came to end this, Elara said, not to trade myself for him. You misunderstand your position, girl. You are not here to negotiate. You are here because the old law recognizes Moonwood blood, and I intend to use every drop of it, whether you offer it willingly or not. He drew a blade, old and ceremonial, the kind used in rites long fallen out of practice. A binding taken by force is still a binding, under the old texts. Your crown-loving king cannot argue against a law he claims to respect only when it is convenient. There is something you have not accounted for, my lord, Elara said, and she did not step back, though every instinct urged her to. You assumed I came here without telling anyone what you intended. Thorne's confidence flickered, just slightly, and in that half-second of doubt, Corvin's riders broke from the tree line on both ridges, and Garrick Stonewell's men closed the far end of the bridge, and Cassian, seizing the distraction with the desperate strength of a man who had spent 2 nights bound and terrified, threw himself sideways away from his captors, buying just enough chaos for the Crown's forces to close the gap. The fight on the bridge was short and brutal, and entirely unlike the elegant confrontations of council chambers. Corvin met Thorn blade to blade at the bridge's center, and Elara, rather than retreating, moved instead toward Cassian, dragging him clear of the worst of it, her father's old training carrying her hands steady, even as her heart hammered against her ribs. "You warned them," Cassian gasped, as she pulled the last of the binding rope free from his wrists. "After everything, you still—" "I did not do it for you," she said. "I did it because it was right. Learn the difference, Cassian, before it is the only lesson left for you to learn." At the bridge's center, Corvin disarmed Thorn with a final, controlled strike that sent the old ceremonial blade skittering across the stone into the pass below, and Garrick's men closed around the older lord before he could reach for anything else. "It is over, Thorn," Corvin said, breathing hard, his voice carrying the particular calm that settles only after a great danger has finally, fully passed. "You will answer for this before the full council. Every name in your network. Every hand that helped you reach for a crown that was never going to be yours by force." Thorn, restrained and defeated, looked past Corvin to where Elara knelt beside Cassian on the bridge stones, and something bitter and almost admiring moved across his face. "The old law was written to balance power," he said. "I only ever wanted what it promised any wolf with the right blood." "The old law," Elara said, rising, "was never meant to be taken. It was meant to be chosen. You lost the moment you decided force was easier than earning it." The sun cleared the eastern ridge, fully as Thorn was led away, gilding the old stone bridge in pale gold light, and Elara felt Corvin's hand find hers amid the settling chaos, warm and certain, and understood, standing there in the aftermath, that whatever came next, they would face the rest of it exactly the way they had faced this, together, with nothing left hidden between them. The council chamber was already packed with every lord in the Northern Territories when Elara and Corvin arrived the following week, Lord Alaric Thorn standing at the center of the floor in chains, his silver-templed composure finally, entirely gone. "You will confirm before this full council," Corvin said, taking his seat at the head of the long table with Elara beside him in her own chair, earned and unquestioned now by anyone in the room. Every name connected to the Hollow Fang network, every raid ordered, every threat sent, beginning with the message left at my ward's door and ending with the bridge at Wolf's Pass. Thorn, faced with the archivist's records Elara and Corbin Wells had spent careful weeks assembling, roots, payments, the torn genealogical page, testimony from the captured riders, did not bother denying what the evidence had already made undeniable. He spoke for the better part of an hour, naming names, confirming plans, and when he finished, the chamber sat in the particular heavy silence of a room that had just watched a conspiracy unravel entirely into daylight. "Your title is stripped," Corvin said. "Your remaining lands come under direct Crown administration. You will spend what remains of your years in the southern holding lands, far from any border you might once again be tempted to reorganize by force." Thorn was led from the chamber without another word, and the doors closed behind him with a sound that was not dramatic at all, simply final, which left one name still standing in the gallery, pale and silent, waiting. Cassian Drager stepped forward when Corvin's gaze found him, and the chamber, sensing another reckoning approaching, went quiet once more. "You passed information to a man plotting against the Crown," Corvin said. "That is not a small thing, whatever regret came afterward." "I know," Cassian said. "I do not ask for the Council's mercy on the strength of my regret alone." Corvin looked at Elara, and something passed silently between them. A question, offered without words, of what justice looked like here, in this particular case, for this particular man. "He came to me before Thorn's final move," Elara said, rising, addressing the chamber directly. "He did not have to. He risked everything Thorn might have done to him for it, and because he did, We had warning enough to plan for the bridge, instead of simply reacting to it. That does not erase what he did before, but it should be weighed against it. She turned to Cassian, and her voice, when it came, was steady and clear, and carried the particular quiet weight of a woman who had finally, fully closed a door she no longer needed anyone else to lock for her. You will keep your title, Cassian. You will keep your lands. But you will not sit on any council that touches the crown's affairs again, not for a very long time, and every hall you enter will remember exactly why, not as a villain, as a man who nearly cost everyone everything, and was only saved from being remembered that way by one honest choice, made far too late to undo the rest. Cassian bowed his head, accepting it, and left the chamber a changed man in every way that mattered, not punished into darkness, but reduced, quietly and permanently, to the ordinary size he had always secretly feared he was. The chamber cleared slowly afterward, lords filing out in low, urgent conversation, until only Corvin and Elara remained. The fire in the hearth burned down to embers, afternoon light going long and gold through the tall windows. You gave him mercy, Corvin said. I gave him what he earned. No more, no less. She looked at him. The same as I intend to give myself, from now on. Elara. He turned to face her fully, and there was nothing careful left in his expression at all. Nothing measured or contained. I do not want a crown that requires old law to justify choosing you. I chose you the night you stood at that altar with your spine straight and your voice steady, and I have not stopped choosing you, every single day since, for reasons that have nothing to do with any bloodline written in any archive. And if I did not carry Moonwood blood at all, Elara said quietly. If I was simply Bran Frostholt's daughter, with no old law behind me at all, would this still be true? It was true before I ever learned about the blood, he said. It will be true long after every lord in that chamber has forgotten Thorn's name entirely. I did not fall in love with a bloodline, Elara. I fell in love with a woman who walked out of a ruined ceremony with more dignity than the man who ruined it, and who has spent every day since proving that dignity was never the limit of what she had to offer, only the beginning of it. She closed the distance between them, and this time, when she kissed him, there was nothing left uncertain in it at all. No politics, no old law, no careful conditions weighed and measured. Simply two people who had earned, through cold roads and archive nights and a bridge at dawn, the right to choose each other freely. They bonded at the turn of spring, in the same style of hall where Elara had once stood at an altar and watched a cord be tied by a man who did not deserve to tie it. This time, she chose the cord herself, a plain dark blue thread with no ceremony gold woven through it, because she had learned, by then, that the plainest things were often the ones worth the most. This time, when it was fastened, the whole hall rose in a single motion, not from obligation, but from something that looked, unmistakably, like joy. Mother Ysault, older now and slower on her feet, traveled all the way from Draga lands to witness it, and found Elara afterward, in the quiet of the garden, away from the noise of the celebration. I said nothing, that night at your altar, the old elder admitted. I have carried the shame of my silence a long while. I am glad, child, that you did not need my blessing to become exactly what you were always going to become. You gave me something better than a blessing, Elara said gently. You gave me a witness. Sometimes that is enough to build a life on, until you find the rest yourself. Bran Frostholt lived long enough to see his daughter's first child born, a dark-haired girl with her mother's steady eyes, and he held her by the Eastern Ridge fire with the particular quiet joy of a man who had once feared his daughter's story had ended on a cold road, and lived instead to watch it grow into something far larger than either of them had dared imagine that night. Lady Isha, in her final years, finally told Elara the full truth of her mother's fire. Not an accident, as everyone had always said, but an early, failed attempt by a lesser branch of the same conspiracy Thorn would later lead, to erase the Moonwood line before it could ever be found. Maren Frostholt had died, protecting the truth of who her daughter was, so that one day, when the world was ready for her, Ilara might choose what to do with it herself, freely, rather than have it chosen for her by force. Ilara wept when she heard it, and then, for the first time in years, felt something in her chest finally settle into peace. Cassian Drager never sat on a crown council again, but he lived out his years quietly on his family's lands, and when word reached him, seasons later, that Ilara had named her second child after no one in particular, simply because she liked the sound of the name, he found himself, unexpectedly, glad for her, in the plain and uncomplicated way people are sometimes glad for a happiness they no longer have any claim to. Years later, when the wolves of the Northern Territories told the story of the crown's Frosthold queen, they did not tell it as a tale of an old law finally fulfilled, or a bloodline finally found. They told it the way the best stories are always told, as a girl who walked away from a door that was closing, and found, waiting 3 miles down a frozen road, a king willing to open one instead. And they told it, always, with the same ending, that the strongest crown any of them had ever seen was not the one Corvin Ashgard wore into council chambers, but the quiet, unshaken dignity of the woman who stood beside him, who had once been told she was not enough, and had spent the rest of her life proving, gently and completely, exactly how wrong that had been. Thanks for staying with me until the very end. If you enjoyed this story, please hit the like button, subscribe for more stories like this, and share your thoughts in the comments. How do you think it all ended? See you in the next one.